So we're talking about the logbook, and Pat, as you see, Pat grabbed a logbook, used the logbook. Brad Hanson, who comes along sometimes, you may know him. He is a good friend of mine. One of his good buddies is a guy named Keith Owen. I'd actually knew of Keith. I didn't. Keith Owen is a very high-ranked BJJ teacher under a gentleman named Pedro Sauer, who I think is probably one of the greatest teachers of all time. But he wrote a really good book called From the Ground Up, I think it's called. Just an ebook. You can get it for $8, $9. There's a link to it right there. And I got that book on the recommendation of Brad. I didn't even know it existed, and Brad mentioned it. And I was just reading through it, and that's what inspired me to do this little section on logbooks again today, because Keith Owen and his book From the Ground Up, which is actually a book for BJJ beginners, and he talks about logbooks in his book. That's the cover of Keith Owen's book, and it really is a good little book, even for non-BJJ people. It's really a worthwhile book. He has a great attitude, and the reason I knew of him before was because I'd watched a couple of his videos online, and he has a really nice, humble, but knowledgeable approach. Anyway, in his book, he talks about logbooks. This is the logbook. Now, you don't have to use this. You can literally just use a pad. The point of the logbook is to keep a record so you know where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. And what I meant by work the gap was you have to know where you are, you have to know where you're going, and you've got to have a plan to get there. And most people do that in their head. And it's just not good enough. It's just, the logbook says so many wonderful things. It helps you focus on the areas that you're short on. And really, at the end of the day, if you focus on the 3 magic questions, we call them quintessential questions, what did I do well? What didn't I do well? What am I going to do about it? Well, then combining that with a logbook is just a recipe for rapid exponential improvement in your training. Because what it does is, if you analyze where you went wrong in each training session, don't make it a big thing. But if you analyze it and write it down, then what happens is you can break it down and work out what you need to work on. Shingitai, okay, the body, the technique, the mind, the technique, and the body. So that's your physicality needs to be worked on. You need to keep a record of that. You need to plan it very well. You've got your peaking programs and things like that if you're training for a specific event. The technique, you're trying to work a technique, and the technique may have 7 or 8 different steps to it. If you write it down, you go over and you go, what am I doing wrong? You go back and you realize you're leaving a couple of the steps out along the way, and the mind stuff is also good too, because will keep track of whether you're on track with your head. If you want to develop your meditation habit, well, then just keep a record on each of the pages of how long you meditated that day. If you are finding that you're stepping back a little bit too much under pressure because there's a very subtle survival instinct coming out to protect yourself against being hit, okay, well, then you keep a track of it. Another thing that might be happening is that some days you're not performing as well. Well, if you have a logbook, you can see that you're maybe not getting the recovery you need after a very hard session. Okay, so the logbook can zero in on the exact points that you need to work on. And there's a good concept, which is the finer the detail, the clearer the process. And that's really, really important. The finer the detail, the clearer the process. And what you need to do is clarify the process of where I am now, where I'm going, and how do I get there so I can cover that gap. And that's all training really is. This is why sometimes I think belts they have benefits and drawbacks. People who are grading focused lose track of what they're really there for, but the logbook will keep that in focus, especially when you get your black belt. So many people get their black belt and you don't see them anywhere near as often in the dojo because they think the black belt is the goal. But the Shodan is actually where you've just literally opened the door to the rest of your life of training. Until then, you're really just, learning how to read and write, learning how to pronounce a language. See, training's a bit like a language. And unless you have the understanding and the experience of stringing sentences together, being able to respond well, being able to take visual cues off people in conversations so that you're capable of using that language in all circumstances, well, then I found when I first went and lived in Japan, when I went to high school, one of the English teachers at the school was a lovely old gentleman named Inoue Gonnosuke. And anyone whose name ends in something Nosuke, they're pretty old, because that's really almost a pre-World War II name thing. Names change with time, as you know. In my day, in my mum's day, Gertrude and Rita and Lorna, and those names are very popular. They're not so popular now. So anyway, I can recall that Inoue Sensei, English teacher at school, was the designated translator of Shakespeare. He was the one that the Japanese education system used to translate Shakespeare into textbooks. He knew more about English than I ever did, and he couldn't speak a sentence. So when he wanted to talk to me about something, he would actually have to write it down, and I'd have to read it. Because even though he knew every rule, every grammar rule, he could explain the use of pronouns, verbs, adverbs, predicates, subjects, objects, the works. He knew it all, and he could pull apart anything that I wrote and fix it grammatically. But he couldn't speak it because he didn't have that experience. Well, the colored belts are learning those rules. And by the time you get to Shodan, you're now getting ready to start to string nice sentences together and write a little bit of poetry and maybe try your little 2 or 3 line haiku poems. And the point is you need to master that stuff. But knowing all the rules like Inoue Sensei doesn't mean you've mastered the language. And this is the problem with the grading system. But if you have a clear focus on where you are, where you want to go, and how to get there with your logbooks, it makes a tremendous difference. In my younger days, I always kept notes of my training. I was often surprised at how my notes made at that time differed from my memory. Yes, there's a good point too. Memory is fallible. Memory makes a lot of mistakes. Sometimes you hear people just completely exaggerating some event that happened. And you were there. This happens to me all the time. People think I don't remember, but I've been keeping logbooks forever. And when I translate for Solsai, I always kept notes. In fact, sometimes you'll see, if you look at videos of me translating with Solsai, I'm actually writing things down in a kind of shorthand. And I kept those notes. And every time Solsai would meet with someone, I would keep the notes. And I'm not going to spread those notes around. But later on, when they try to change the story, or when they think that it went one way when it actually didn't, you'd be surprised, like Mike says there, how the notes differ from the memory of what they thought was said. It's very, very true. So that's one of the main reasons why logbooks are so good. Now, before I go on, all my subscribers, thank you very much. If you think you get something out of these videos, by all means, share it with your friends. That's the best way. Let them know, send a link, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a message, leave a thumbs up. All those good things will help me to grow the channel. But by all means, please pass the word around, share the stream. And my Patreon family, of course, that goes without saying. Thank you for everything that you do. Okay, and like Mike just said there, which reminds me, like Mike said, that he kept notes of his training days, and the memory often is different to the notes. That happens with technique too. When you're learning a new technique, and it might be a little sophisticated, where it's necessary to move your weight in a certain way to make it work and so on. Sometimes you can't quite make it right. You go back and check the details, and you can see where you're going wrong. If you've got a goal in mind, so Paddy's using it because he's got his 50-man kumite coming up. Some guys use it for tournaments preparation, but if you have a goal in mind, you can break down what needs to be done in bite-sized chunks. And as I've mentioned with Yusuke Fuji, who went on to win the All Japan Championship at 22, 23 years old, we set an 8-year plan. The 8-year plan became 8 one-year plans. 8 one-year plans became 4 3-month plans. The 3-month plan became 12 plus 1, 12 weeks plus 1 week rest, recovery, and review. Each week was 7 days, 6 days training, 1 day rest. Each day was morning and night. And each session was therefore planned. So he knew what he had to do in tomorrow morning to win the All Japan in 8 years, and he won it in 6. So that is so important for when you're setting long-term goals and so on. You can break down what needs to be done in bite-sized chunks, and it's so important. Nobody gets there through some big event. You get there through the little consistencies, the step-by-step consistencies. That's why I've always taped my magazine interviews. People remembering things I never said. And yes, you're right. I always tape mine too, Mike. That's very true. And I have the tapes. It's very true. And sometimes I hear 20 years later, 25 years later, especially since Solsai died, I'm constantly amazed at how our people's history with the great leaders of Kyokushin changed after they died. You know, it's after Bruce Lee died, all of a sudden you got people everywhere who were his training partners or his instructors or things like that, you know. Okay, so by keeping notes, keeping video, the one thing I think is very, very important about video is you need to have permission from your instructor, and don't, for crying out loud, put it on social media. You know, there's this incredible narcissistic movement of people putting videos of themselves flexing muscles and so on social media. It's like, get away from that. That's not what you want to be doing. And the videos that you take, you could almost wipe them after you've reviewed it. So you might have a video of yourself doing some kumite. When you have an opportunity, sit with your instructor or sit with your friend and review it. And you'll see habits. You might get through the whole kumite without being scored on, and you're knocking guys and bang, but you'll still see that this hand is sagging down, or you'll still see that you drop your shoulder when you shouldn't, and so on. So you have to use the video very critically. If you want to keep it, great, download it, take it off. You can use your phone. These things are the best training aids in the world. You get one of those little tripods, sit the phone on it, and video yourself moving. It's very revealing. Sometimes it's too revealing. People don't like it, you know. And by watching those videos and also reading your notes in your logbook, you can see trends that are starting to happen. You see things that happen. So you might find that, for example, without being aware of it, or without being conscious of it, or without admitting it, there might be certain sessions that you're skipping. Maybe you don't like those sessions. Or you might find that your fatigue is causing you to lag on a certain day of the week, where you go back, check what happened the days before it. You know, you might not be getting enough rest in your hard cardio, things like that. Okay. Now, a good logbook, and I think this one here, this logbook that I've produced is the one that Paddy's using. It's also Rochelle has one. I think these logbooks are really simple to use. They have some great information on the processes, the 7-stage kumite mastery, the 8 steps of grappling. Also, it has a number of really interesting training suggestions, concepts. how to create a plan, addressing the shin-gi tie. So you look at where I am now. That's what I mean. Where I am now, where am I going? What am I going to do about it to get there? How do I bridge that gap? So you've got to look at your strengths, what's neutral and what needs work. And that will allow you to zero in. You have the yearly planner. See that? So you first quarter, and each quarter is broken up into 13 weeks. One of those weeks is a rest week. So I do 6 weeks, each quarter, 1 week at a time. One of those boxes represents what you can be aiming for in that week. And what that will force you to also do is narrow down your focus. Too many people aim for too many things too quickly. Take your time. I think black belts are given out far too quickly. You just can't achieve the depth of experience you need if you get the gradings too quickly. So you keep this plan, you map out the 4 quarters of the years, and then this section here is on your long-term and short-term goals. K350, T250. If you're not sure what they are, let me know in the notes. That's concepts that we've developed, which are very, very useful, I think. You may have already heard me talk about the K350, which is connected to the 7 stages of Kumite, and the T250, which is a grappling concept we work on. So you set your 5, your 3, your 2, your 1 year goals, your 6-month goals, 3-month goals. Now, the amount of detail you want to put in is up to you. And of course, you might shy away from it. And if you're lazy from it, you'll get lazy results. I'm not saying you have to do this, you have to do that. But remember that the finer the detail, the clearer the process. And here I've got samples in how to use the logbook. I toyed with different designs, and some logbooks have 1 page per day and but it becomes a lot of wasted space. So I encourage people for the personal logbooks. I just have line pages, and you can put what you want, line it off, next day, line it off. So you might only have 2 lines for 1 day, but if the whole page is dedicated to that day, you've wasted a lot of space. So I think it cuts it back. Then you've got the group log sessions. So that you put the date, your intensity, what effort you made, what was it, shingi or tai, did you tap or did you do rounds? And that's related to T250 and K350. It's keeping a record of your ongoing number of rounds that you have. And then what you might have is concepts of what you did during the training session. It might be group skills, drilling, or things like that. And this section here, again, this section where you're actually working the skills themselves. This, I think, is solid gold here, the skill drilling logs. See, realistically, you're not going to master something until you've done it a lot of times. Most people think they've got it mastered after they've done it 20 or 30 times. And when you've done it 20 or 30 times, your brain will try to convince you that you've done it 200 or 300 times when you haven't. So this is what this is for. Each of those squares represents 10 reps. When you fill that up, that's 1,000 reps. And you can keep a track of the technique. So it might be a footwork technique, or see this one, it says this particular skill that you're working on, and it might be one of those skills in that 12-week breakdown. This is start position, default stance, Maegeri off the back leg. So you're trying to snap a speed back kick, front kick off the back leg. The objective is to develop snap off explosive double hip movement, perpetual motion, fake footwork, fade hip movement, flow with the rhythm. So back leg whips off the snap, etc. And you keep notes. All right. So that's, and then at the end of the logbook, you keep a record of any injuries, any tournaments, a summary of it, and you grab another one. You just you know, the whole idea of it sometimes a little intimidating to people, but 20 years later, 30 years later, I have my logbooks from my training as an Uchideshi with Masoyama in 1984. They were actually the catalyst that got me to write my book, because along with keeping a logbook of my training, I was keeping a record of things that Sosai said or things that went on in the dojo, even things like how the drum beat was done, how they bow in, how they bow out, all that stuff I took from my logbooks and put in the book. You know, write what you want in the logbook, keep a record of it, but they have to be used. Don't just get the logbook and not use it. Get into the habit of using it, referring to it, narrow down the range of techniques that you're working on. That's very important. And by focusing with a logbook and having a space for that one technique, you know, it's the Bruce Lee thing, the Bruce Lee concept. Don't be someone who learns 10,000 techniques. Be someone who practices one technique 10,000 times. You know, and in the grappling world, what they often say is, it's not the ones who've never tapped that you need to worry about. It's the ones who have tapped 10,000 times. They've experienced every possible scenario, you know. So this is why I really love the logbooks, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. I've experimented with different logbooks online. I do use an app. It's called Rep Count, and I don't go to the gym and do weights, but what I do is I keep a record on this particular free app, and it might say, like, cycling this morning, 78 minutes, 1125 calories, 35 kilometers, rode to the Spit, the Miami, felt good for the most, 130 beats per minute average, 156 max, not much, but it's good for my old age, and 26.9 kilometers per hour average, 37 Ks max. So you just keep a record of this, and these apps are really good because they then log your training at any time. You can keep a record of it. But I like the app because it doesn't take much writing. If you're going to use a lot of writing with detail, step-by-step outlines of the techniques and the flow of the technique, handwriting to me is much, much better. I just find, same with diaries. I've always used a written diary as opposed to an online diary, because the process of clicking, trying to find your finger on those little keyboards and everything, isn't anywhere near as expressive as using a pen. If you haven't got a logbook, not a problem. Go to the newsagent and grab a little notebook and just start keeping a track. If you need to know a little more detail, let me know. If you want to grab one of mine, let me know. But anyway, logbooks are vital, keeping a track. I also think that using video constructively is useful. Don't go putting it up. I went to a seminar not too long ago. Nice people. Everyone thinks they're doing the right thing, but they don't realize what they're doing. And before I had gotten home from the seminar, it was on YouTube, it was on Facebook. And I had to ask the person to take it down. I didn't, not that, you know, there's nothing secret about it. It's just that when people make the effort to go to the seminar, and often what an instructor will do is, rather than encourage their students to go to the seminar, they'll go to the seminar and then learn as much as they can and pass that information on to their students, half without giving credit where credit's due, and try to convince people that it's their stuff. I hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, please, let's have some dialogue for a few minutes. And if you haven't hit like and subscribe, then by all means do so. I think the logbooks are just the most underused training aid there is, that and video, and it's really worth looking into. Thank you, guys. I feel a little awkward. But the reality is, it was just reading Keith Owen's book, and that link that I put, I'll put it again. You can get his ebook, and even though it's a book about BJJ training, it's definitely worth looking at from any martial arts training. You know, he's got some things in it that are real gems, and you might find that they help your training, especially if you're doing any grappling. From a grappling viewpoint, it's fantastic. And reading that this morning, reading a section of it this morning, reminded me of how valuable the logbooks have been for me. Enjoy it. Okay, guys. I always appreciate your company. Thank you, guys. Us.